It was looking like a rout as the Minnesota Vikings took a 28-0 lead in the first half. The Minnesota Vikings, everyone was pulling out what's the largest margin of victory against the Green Bay Packers? 1973 came up, a 2000 something came up, and a Jalen Naylor muffed punt into a Packers touchdown made it 28-7. And it turns out that the Minnesota Vikings win 31-29 after it's all said and done. And of course, to bring on the offensive coordinator / head coach / defensive mind, he is a football mind. We've got to bring him on. Jacob, what was your reaction to the Karl Anthony Towns trade?
I think I like it. Because what it does is it resets the window a little bit. So Ant Edwards, he's only 22, whatever he is. So, he can get off the Randall contract. I think, honestly, as much as Randall is pretty good, the Dante DiVincenzo part of the trade.
Yep.
He averaged like 18 a game last year, shooting like 43% from three or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to be the bigger piece, is that a crunch time lineup that has him in it now, and he's a scrappy defender as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you don't have to play Randall. You can play Randall. Randall can maybe be your sixth man who's scoring a lot off the bench, or scoring, he's the starter who kind of plays with the bench unit a lot or whatever.
Right.
Because I don't know how well he'll blend in with like Ant and friends. But still a valuable piece nonetheless. So yeah, no, I think it's the rare win-win, because this definitely makes the Knicks a better team too. I think Towns fits that Knicks squad perfectly. So yeah.
Well, I think that's going to do it for this podcast. Jacob, thanks for joining the show today to recap the Minnesota Vikings 31-29 win. It's a pleasure to hear your thoughts, and just grateful for your take on it.
I appreciate you having me.
All right. Your reaction to the Minnesota Vikings 31-29 win in dramatic fashion. At the end of the game, I was hoping that we had the officials for that Michigan Gophers game, that they would call an onside call or offsides call when he clearly was not offsides. And here we go. Minnesota Vikings won. They got the onside kick. Your reaction to the win? 4-0. As we all had them, but
yes,
I thought I'd mention that too.
Yeah, and the Jets looked great today against the Broncos, and the loss to the Broncos. So, next week's going to be a tough one as well. Obviously a pretty convincing win. The score getting close at the end doesn't bother me as much as it'll probably bother a lot of people.
I agree.
Just because, now, yes, could the Vikings have been more aggressive to try to keep the score, a wide margin? Yes. Did Darnold make a few dumb choices? Yes. The punt return thing, just let it bounce. So we had our mistakes and whatnot. But that was as close as the Packers really were going to be able to get. And when push came to shove, the Vikings had that one drive that got the field goal that sealed the game, essentially. So, the Packers threw the ball 54 times. It's somewhat inevitable that they're going to be able to move the ball down the field a little bit when they're down by 28 points. They're going to be just passing. But Darnold overall looked good. That one interception wasn't great, although I thought that was not an interception. It looked like he was bobbling it all the way down.
That was not an interception.
I thought this was like the weirdest game I've ever seen in terms of the challengeable catches situation. There were so many that were like grazing the ground, being bobbled around. Just a lot of weird catches or non-catches that made
You could see that the defender had control when he was falling to the ground, and at that point, he didn't have his feet touching the turf. I don't know how you come away with a standing conclusion, because typically you got to have the whole, there's undisputable evidence that you can't reverse this call or whatever they say. And that was as disputable as you could get.
Yeah, it seemed pretty clear because, he bobbed it like 3 times on his way down, and then, So some weird plays. He needs to stop taking hits when he scrambles. Like, just go down. slide, do whatever you got to do, because he got rolled up on again.
Yes, he did.
And again, it was kind of his fault. I mean, no, I think that looked like a hip drop tackle, so more than likely that guy's probably going to get fined. But too late if all of a sudden that does take his knee out, kind of thing. So he's got to be a little more careful with that. Jones looked great. The line looked great. Addison looked great in his return. So defense obviously forcing 3 interceptions and a fumble, I think. So
right.
You cannot ask for much more in terms of what the Vikings were able to do today.
The reaction to this game is that how could you let the Packers back into this ball game? How the coaching staff, oh my gosh, we're lucky that we escaped a victory. When my reaction is completely different. I see a first half 28-0 lead, and my mind always goes back to the law of averages, the way things are going to shake out. The Vikings were never going to win that game 56-0 or 41 donut. And, that happened to the Vikings back in the early 2000s where they lost to the Giants in the NFC Championship game 41-0. But typically that doesn't happen. Typically when you face a team on the road like Green Bay, as good as they are, as well coached as they are, they're going to eventually find themselves back into this ball game. And you see the same thing happen with the Minnesota Vikings, particularly against the Indianapolis Colts a few years ago when they were down 33-0 at halftime. It was a blowout. They had no chance. Well, somehow, some way they came back and won the game because things tend to even out in the NFL. So I was not surprised at the Packers' comeback. The first half was amazing. Everything went right. O'Connell 3-0 on challenges. The Packers couldn't do anything right. Jordan Love interception, overthrow, underthrow, couldn't get a consistent rhythm on the field. And the Minnesota Vikings were just mowing them over. But eventually, the Packers were going to come back and make a run. It happens in every single sport, whether it be the NBA, NFL, things like that happen. And I would argue that I would rather win a football game that way than winning a game 50-0 because it creates adversity. It creates situations that you need to bounce back from. And that's what a playoff football game looks like more often than winning a football game 41-0. So I think winning this way actually prepares the Minnesota Vikings more in the future than it would have if they just blew the doors off the building.
Yep. Well, and just so, they were up 3 scores with about 12 minutes left in the fourth quarter. You're playing to not make a monumental mistake to give the Packers the ball.
Right.
Because as long as you don't majorly screw up, there's not very many scenarios where you should give up 21 points in 12 minutes. Again, without you really screwing things up. Now, we did, right? The Darnold fumble gave the Packers that one shot of life that they needed. But aside from that, the Vikings did what they needed to do. So, yeah, that wasn't overly concerning. Yes, it'd be nice to see a couple more touchdowns or some better drives in the second half, whatever. But at the end of the day, they did what they needed to do to go get the win. So
at the end of the day, wasn't this the most points they've scored in a regular season game? They scored 28 against the Giants, 23 against the Niners.
Yeah, probably.
Who did they play last week? Houston Texans.
Close, right? Similar.
Yeah. I don't think they scored 31 points against the Texans, but they scored 31 against the Packers. They scored 28 first half points, and a lot of those were because Jordan Love was intercepted twice. And Minnesota Vikings scoring position, I guess they scored 34 against the Texans. So they scored more points last week than they did this week against the Packers. But it was right there as a field goal difference. They scored 31 points against the Texans. And can you talk everybody off the edge of, the Minnesota Vikings defense went into more of a preventative defense at the end of the game. Jordan Love was, getting all of his yards that way. They went down the field very easily at the end of the game, like 56 seconds, so that they could try to kick an onside kick to get the ball back. But we now see this from Ed Donatel a couple years ago. We see this from Brian Flores. We see this from every single defensive coordinator in football. At the end of the game, when teams are up, they go into a soft preventative defense. So there's got to be something to this other than the Minnesota Vikings just laying off on purpose.
Yeah, I would still think you'd want to do it a little better than what they did. Yeah. And as somebody going against Jaden Reed in fantasy, it was very disheartening to see him catch he had like 60 yards receiving on that last little 1 minute drive there. But But the whole point of it is you play deep so they don't score immediately, right? The only way you probably get burned is if you give up one giant play on, a touchdown on one play. Now, the prevent defense isn't that helpful if you give up, what did it take them, 4 plays or 5 plays? It wasn't much, right? And only took a few seconds. So that kind of defeats the purpose of the prevent part of it, because the whole point is, right, hey, let's sit back, let's make them throw underneath, let's make them take however long we try to make them take, kind of thing. As long as possible to milk the clock, that sort of thing. But they just did not do a very good job with it, obviously, because it was like 3 plays or 4 plays, and the Packers just waltzed straight in.
Right. A big storyline in this football game was Aaron Jones versus his former team, the Green Bay Packers. Is he going to get his quote-unquote revenge? Will he score a touchdown so he can do the Lambeau leap into the crowd? And even though he did not score his touchdown, the Minnesota Vikings were trying to get it to him, you could tell, but he still got his Lambeau leap in at the end of the game. How much fear do you think goes into an NFL player when they jump into the stands and are surrounded by 10, 15, 20 sports fans?
Probably not too much fear. Although I feel like you always see it, like somebody will have like a beer poured on them, or stuff like that'll happen.
Right.
But I
and typically there's like security guards right there when they do it, but I didn't see any security guards right there.
No, after the game, I suppose they're a little thinner. I mean, the biggest thing is he's done that how many times at Lambeau, right? I mean, he's done the Lambeau leap plenty of times.
Right.
And, man, he has looked good, hasn't he, all year so far? He has. I think the one thing that we kind of overlook, maybe is the right way to say it, is we forget that they're human beings and that they are actually still, like, playing, it's a game for them, right? And just the idea that he spent his whole career with the Green Bay, that's where his house was, that's where his family was, that's where his life was for so long. And then you switch teams and you play that rivalry with all those guys that you already, your teammates from a year ago.
Right.
The emotions of that, I'm guessing Aaron Jones had a pretty good day.
Right. Yeah,
he had to think about it at a lower level, because they're just pro guys, like they don't, they're getting paid millions of dollars, they don't care, whatever, blah blah blah. It's like, hey, these things matter. This means a lot to him. So,
and he's so good at being a multi-dimensional football player. You look at 22 carries for 93 yards, but that doesn't tell the entire story, which the Minnesota Vikings, when's the last time they had a player that also had 4 catches for 46 yards? So even though he didn't get over his 100 yards rushing, which is always the number that, running backs are looking to get in a regular season football game, he still put together, 140 all-purpose yards with his catches included. So I think a part of why the Minnesota Vikings offense is so good this season is because you don't really know what's coming. And, they talk about the play action and blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. But it seems very real for the Vikings. And I think that's why Sam Darnold is able to have so much success.
Yeah, no, they are balanced. I mean, Darnold leads the league in passing touchdowns, but Jones is right up there in terms of total rushing yards. I don't remember if he was first or not, but he was close if he wasn't first. So yeah, I mean, they're running on all cylinders right now, and it gives Darnold's been mostly accurate. Just a mistake here or there every once in a while, but it's bound to happen, and it's been fun to watch, and obviously pretty hard for other teams to stop. So
yeah, and. Going back to the adversity thing a little bit, and with Sam Darnold, earlier this season in week 2 against the San Francisco 49ers, the 49ers made it 20-14. And the Minnesota Vikings needed to put a field goal together because the 49ers had all the momentum going their way, and they're without JJ, without Addison, without Hawkinson. And Sam Darnold needed to lead the team down the field. He makes a beautiful pass to Jalen Naylor down the field, that little back shoulder throw. Gets in field goal range, basically seals the deal. it happens again. Sam Darnold, in 2 of the 4 starts for the Minnesota Vikings, has been absolutely clutch when the Minnesota Vikings needed him most. And to me, that is one of the most shocking stories of the season, because you're asking a guy, everyone knows the story of Darnold, bounced around team to team to team, now his 4th team with the Minnesota Vikings, and now to ask him to make clutch throws in difficult situations, hit wide receivers on the money, and get into field goal range when all the momentum is on the other side. All the momentum's in the Packers. They got a touchdown. He just fumbled, too. All the confidence could be shattered. Goes out there, leads the Vikings to a field goal, does it again, and it seals the deal.
And it was at Lambeau this time, too. Obviously, home versus 49ers.
Right.
At least you can kind of reset with your crowd. But, yeah, you're at Lambeau. That's tough. I mean, and let's be honest, I don't know how many clutch reps he would have had at, with the New York Jets or with the Carolina Panthers. I don't think there's a whole lot of clutch reps that he was getting to get. And even in college, I don't have college stats in front of me, but I imagine there weren't, he had a lot of probably big games where they weren't in, they had some close games, obviously, but he's probably not had a whole slew of close games over the course of his career that he's gotten that clutch gene practice. So, yeah, it's nice to see that he's not folding under any kind of pressure. The fumble, that probably was. I don't know if you noticed it. They were in that little out on the right, and he shoulder faked it, so maybe there was something else to it. But he was open on that little out, so then that's what caused the fumble, is he held back onto it. So I don't know. I'd be interested to know if he was supposed to have that timing route on the out and he screwed it up and was nervous about it, or if there was another, it was a pump and go kind of thing or whatever. But,
yeah.
So that was the only mistake that he really made.
Right. But, yeah. The interception, which really wasn't an interception because he didn't have both feet in bounds, which we talked about a little bit earlier.
When
Jordan Love,
he kind of threw it only to where the receiver could get it, because the corner really couldn't get it because he was out of bounds.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's a good point.
It was a good miss on his part. He threw it out, way outside where no one could get it, and yeah.
Right. During this football game, the warning signs that have kind of been, putting on the surface started happening in the second half. I said, watch out, because there's going to be a time this season where things turn for the worst for the Minnesota Vikings. And you saw, it's a tale of 2 halves. Every bounce besides the punt return that Naylor muffed went the Minnesota Vikings way. Like he's talked about earlier, the passes that were almost incomplete or that were almost complete were just barely incomplete. The passes that were that were incomplete on the field for the Vikings were just complete enough to reverse it. The Vikings did the challenge for the completed pass, and it was incomplete. Very next play, the Packers challenge an incompleted pass, and it stands.
And we had some PIs called for us, a couple of them that were but the Packers, we did one to them that I thought we were going to get called on, and we did not get called on. I don't remember
on 4th down too. Was. Yeah. I think is the bomb in the end zone, and the Packers receiver was kind of flailing his arms, as receivers do it. And it was turnover on downs for the Packers. Also, Packers missed 2 field goals in the first half.
How satisfying was that?
Vikings win by 2. Tale of 2 halves, baby.
Yeah.
But
hey, when it's your year, baby.
It sure seems like it. It seems like the stars are aligning. And when games like this happen, when you sneak out wins after dominant first half performances and ugly second half performances, and you win, bravo! I'll take that all day, every single day of the week. But
right, if nothing else, we've had 4 extremely entertaining games. Entertaining in some regards, just because the domination was so good, or because we won a couple close games. Which is all you can ask for, right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, it's an entertainment thing. They're good enough now that every Sunday you're kind of like, it's actually be fun to watch. I'm excited.
One of the surprising stats of the game, Jordan Love, as often as he was hit, it seemed like he was getting hit every single time.
It did.
We only sacked him 1 time for 10-yard loss.
I wonder how many QB hits we actually had, or QB rushes, right? Or the hurries. That's what I'm looking for.
Hurries. Well, Blake Cashman had 2 hits. Harrison, let's see here. We had 10 QB hits on him. So we got in there quite a bit.
I say 10's a lot for only having 1 sack. It's pretty crazy.
Right. You compare
Well,
that
I
to the
was wondering,
Packers'
too,
3 QB hits.
I was wondering too if they would switch to, because you can tell he's, limping around a little bit. I thought Willis might have provided some interesting offense for them. No, obviously they ended up scoring 22 points in the second half. Anyway, but I thought Willis. I was waiting to see if they'd put Willis in with how much pressure we were getting, and again having a guy that can kind of scramble around. I feel like that is always the most difficult type of quarterback to play against, because just when you think you have them, all of a sudden they leak out and get, 3rd and 5, they get the 5 yards because they just leak out of the pocket and get it and stuff like that. Which Jordan Love was not doing that, right? He was not mobile today. Obviously he was throwing okay. Well, 3 picks still, but he ended up with decent stats. But I would be surprised. I was surprised a little bit. I thought Willis might come out at halftime.
Yeah. And, the touchdowns that they had in this game, well, they had the muff punt, which led to a short touchdown drive. They had the Sam Darnold fumble, which led to a short touchdown drive. And I can't, argue against that because the Minnesota Vikings had 2 easy touchdown drives too off of Jordan Love's interceptions. The one that the linebacker got and the one that I think Shaq Griffin got in the first half. So, things like that happen. But Jordan Love, he got the big contract last offseason, gave him the big money. I'm just not completely sold on him being one of those top 5 franchise quarterbacks in the league. He had an insane run at the end of the year last year where he went like 27 touchdowns, like 1 or 2 picks, and he was just looking like the top quarterback in the league. And that got him that big contract extension. But you look at what he did against the Vikings and you looked at what he did against the Eagles this year, and his passer rating hasn't been very good. And 4 touchdowns, 3 picks. A lot of those yards came at the end of the game when it was basically out of it. We did a good job containing him.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the NBA guys, right? Like you can't not pay them close to the max, right? If it's the guy's turn, it's the guy's turn, whether you like it or not. When Towns came up for a max contract, you got to pay Towns the max contract. Otherwise, what else are you going to do?
Right.
So it's kind of the same thing with the Packers. You had to pay him maybe not the most money, right? But you have to pay him top-notch money. And will he ever be there? Probably not. I mean, the Giants, we tricked them into signing Daniel Jones, and he is not that guy either. But again, it's either start over or sign the guy you got. Now, and obviously he is much better than Daniel Jones. Jordan Love's a top, I don't know, without rattling him off right now, with top 10, top 15 kind of guy.
Totally. At least top 15.
Yeah. So it's not like he's bad, but it does handicap you a little bit. And I don't know if he's good enough to get you over the hump unless the rest of your team's at least good, which the Packers are still fine. They're not bad. But.
For sure. Well, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on in this ball game?
I don't know. Nice to have a good kicker. That was nice to see, to win the kicking battle. There was no doubt that last kick was going in. That's pretty satisfying.
Totally. Yeah, it feels nice to have a good kicker. Man, first time since Ryan Longwell, I feel like.
Yeah, where it's just like reliable.
Right. Oh, we're in kicking range. That's good. Will the Thrill, they call him.
Will the Thrill.
Yeah. That's his name.
There you go.
Even though he's not that thrilling because he's so good.
True. It's very non-thrilling because you expect it to go in.
Exactly. But anyway, everyone, thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button right there. And thank you for making this podcast part of your day. Right there, right where Jacob's pointing. Number one. Jacob, thank you as always for your awesome insights.
Thank you, friend.